I'm delighted to welcome everyone to our first ever longevity book club event from the Stanford Center on Longevity and the Longevity Project. Thank you all for coming today. I kind of hate to start off our very first session with a bit about the downside of longevity, but the fact is that with longer life expectancy has come greater risks of Alzheimer's, dementia, or other neurological impairments. In 2020, 54 million people worldwide suffer from Alzheimer's or dementia, a 144% increase from 20 years ago. This number is projected to increase to some 157 million by 2050 due to population growth and the aging of the population. In the US, roughly 12 to 18% of adults over the age of 60 suffer from some form of memory loss or cognitive problems. In the US, roughly 12 and approximately 1/3 of the people who pass away after age 65 will die with some form of dementia. But here's the good news. According to our guest today, 1/3 of all current cases of dementia could have been prevented by changes in lifestyle. Day-to-day functioning, productivity, memory, and focus can all be maintained and strengthened throughout life. More and more research points us to a compelling conclusion and powerful message that we, not our genes, can have control over our cognitive health today and the destiny of our brains. So today we're here to talk with Dr. Marc Milstein about how each of us can control our own brain health destiny. First, a little bit about Marc. He's an internationally recognized speaker on optimizing brain health, lowering the risk of dementia, and boosting happiness and productivity. And most importantly, he's the author of a new book called The Age-Proof Brain, New Strategies to Improve Memory, Protect Immunity, and Fight Off Dementia. Let me tell you, everyone, I've read the book, and it's a wonderfully helpful, clear, and well-written book on this topic. Thank you, Marc, for being our first guest on the Longevity Book Club.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
And I'm joined by Martha Deevy, who is the Associate Director of the Stanford Center on Longevity and Senior Research Scholar, and she's going to co-moderate this session with me today. We'll want your questions starting right now. You can put any questions into the Q&A function on Zoom, and producer Kate, who you can't see but is here, will be sifting through them for us. So let's get started. So Marc, let me start off and ask you, having read the book, it seems like lots of things are going on in brain science. So what has sort of compelled you to write the book? What has changed in the last couple of years? So if I read a book 3 years ago and read your book now, what has changed? What is changing so rapidly in our understanding of the brain and how to influence it?
Yeah, that's a great question. What's really changed is our understanding of how much more control we have over the destiny of our brain, also how to help its function day to day. We now know that we can lower risk for Alzheimer's and dementia anywhere from 30 to 60% based on lifestyle factors. So there's a much more of a sense of empowerment, of hope that we can do things. We have these studies now that show that these things actually are very helpful. It's not just about genes. And so really that is the big message. And that's the new insights, is that we have this strong evidence that these lifestyle factors make a big difference.
Marc, I'm curious, and I ask this of faculty that we work with in this area. What are your daily habits? What have you picked up and what have you changed as a result of some of these recent findings?
Yeah, part of the reason I'm interested in this topic is that some of the key things that are so important for brain health are things that I struggle with. So I wasn't always the best sleeper, and we now know how important sleep is for brain health. So I've absolutely adopted these scientific insights into help me sleep. So I'll tell you that one thing that I've found to be so effective and helpful is really getting out in the morning, something that sounds so simple, but when you get outside in the morning, there's this fascinating data and insights into this brain clock that we have, that it starts essentially like a countdown timer to help you fall asleep at night. And in our modern world, it's so easy to be at home or jump in a car and miss out on a couple minutes of getting outside soon after waking up. And I would say that habit of getting outside, getting some natural light, has been so helpful for me to sleep. And it's interesting that it's something that you do in the morning that helps you sleep that night. So optimizing and prioritizing my sleep has been a big one. Other ones too that we can talk about, but I'll start there.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Yeah.
So let me ask you about sleep. And I'm going to give you a two-part question, one from me, sort of the general one, and then a question from the audience, which is actually someone actually sent us this question in advance, which I actually appreciated a lot. The question is, why isn't sleep important to brain health? And there's some functions in life which doesn't, and this was a question came from a caregiver. They don't have the opportunity to have 8 or so uninterrupted hours of sleep. It's not part of their life that they can have. What's your advice for them?
Yeah, definitely. Great questions. So we'll start with why sleep is so important. Two things to be aware of are that when we're sleeping, we're not just resting. There's specific things happening in our brain. And one thing that is so important is that, and it's bizarre, but tonight when you go to sleep, essentially what happens is that your brain inside your skull constricts a bit. It shrinks, and what it's doing is it's squeezing out waste, toxins, and trash. It's this amazing new system called the lymphatic system. And essentially your brain day to day makes byproducts and waste, leftover chemical reactions, and we have to basically clean it. And so the way that we clean it, one of the ways is while we're sleeping, we basically purge this waste out into this empty space as the brain essentially constricts. I know it sounds bizarre, but then once you're squeezing out this waste in certain points of the night when you're asleep, a fluid comes up from your spinal cord and essentially washes this trash away. And so every night you're giving your brain a squeeze and a wash to help remove some of this waste, trash, toxins that builds up in the brain. And as we get older, the efficiency of waste removal in the brain can become less effective. And that's just one piece of a very complex puzzle of things that can happen in the brain. It's not the only thing, but it's a piece of the puzzle. And so what we want to do is we just want to do things that help keep that process effective and efficient. And one of those things is getting that good night's sleep. Now, when it comes to, understandably, there's certain circumstances where people struggle to get good night's sleeps or to get full night's sleeps. One thing to be aware of is it's okay to wake up in the middle of the night. It's okay. The more we hear about how important sleep is, it can be hard to fall back asleep. And we actually sleep in a cycle where we wake up naturally every 90 minutes. You might not be aware of it, but it's the way the sleep cycle works. So if you wake up in the middle of the night, it's okay. Remind yourself, you just had a brain wash that we talked about. You want to have more of these washes and rinses throughout the cycles of the night. But the first thing is it's okay to wake up. The second thing is that finding ways to prioritize a nap can be helpful too. The time that is spent in a nap can help make up for some time that's sleeping of sleep loss. We don't want to make that we don't want to say that that's the magic cure for something. But if someone needs a nap, thinking about midday naps can be helpful. Also trying to think about it's not just one thing when it comes to brain health, although I do highly encourage trying to find ways to optimize and prioritize sleep and make the hours that you're getting do count more. And we can talk about that, things to make sleep more efficient. But thinking about all the things that are important for brain health. So it's sleep is a piece of it. And if that's a struggle for people, thinking about stress management, diet, the underlying conditions that we want to optimize and all of these things that work together.
So we have let me jump in here. We have an interesting question from the audience. Some of us are sleep elites and do not want or need a lot of sleep. Are we still at higher risk for poor brain health in later life?
Yeah, so the sleep elites or the short sleepers, as we call them, that's what we understand is that it's very rare. And there's some genetics involved. We call them these short sleepers. And if you truly are one of these people that doesn't need a lot of sleep, there's no evidence that you need more sleep than you actually are getting. And so we don't want people to be forcibly, stay in bed because you need to get more sleep. Just be sure that you really are one of those people and that, you're not. A lot of people, there used to be this feeling, and it's still prevalent, this idea that it's a badge of honor, to get less sleep. But having an honest assessment and saying, am I really feeling my best each day? Am I having any issues with memory or cognitive function or the ability to focus or be productive? If all those things are in check and they're doing great, and you've had your once or twice a year physical and everything's looking great, and you've really sensed that you don't need as much sleep as other people, then there's evidence that that's fine. But just be aware it's a very small segment of the population.
So you said something earlier about increasing sleep efficiency.
Yeah.
I find that very attractive. It's like having my trash picked up 3 times a day instead of basically once a month, like it seems. So what does that mean? How do you make your sleeping more efficient?
Yeah. So the hours do matter, but how good those hours matter too. And consistency matters too. A study came out just a couple days ago about how important that is. But when it comes to the efficiency of sleep, one thing that's just really simple to think about is your sleeping environment. Yeah, I always tell this quick story about Pete Sampras because he figured something out before brain scientists. And when he was back on the tour playing, tennis all over the world, he used to take black masking tape and cover up every light source in his hotel room. And he said, "Oh, I know, I feel better the next day. I feel I have more energy. I feel like I'm more productive." And we used to think, "Oh, that's kind of bizarre. That's odd." But he was onto something. Those little bits of light that can seem insignificant that are in our bedrooms, especially now, they can interfere with our brain's ability to get into the deeper stages of sleep. Even if your eyelids are closed, this light can interfere. And a study came out this year where they had people sleep in an environment where the light was, you couldn't read by this amount of light, but you could sort of navigate the room. And they tested the people in the study, they tested their blood pressure, their heart rate, their insulin response, and the numbers were off. And what we believe is happening is that in these low levels of light, they're throwing off the brain's ability to get into the deeper stages of sleep. And so something that's really simple is, when you go back to your bedroom tonight, take an assessment and look around and say, am I sleeping in real darkness or is this modern darkness? And just experiment with unplugging a few things. People are often surprised how they feel better the next day if they give their brain a little bit more darkness, and finding that right amount for the individual. But making your sleep more efficient, one easy thing to do is just an assessment of your room. Try making it a little bit darker and see how that feels, because our brain really has evolved to sleep in true darkness, not the modern darkness that illuminates a lot of our bedrooms now.
So sleep, got it. And I actually love that one. I love any excuse to sleep longer. What other habits really are important to ensuring and taking care of our brain health?
Besides sleep?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so there's quite a few, and there are a lot of them involve things that are fun, thankfully. So it's not always about, when we think about healthy habits, people tend to think, oh, it's just taking stuff away or doing things I don't want to do. But something that's really good for your brain is being engaged, being social. So that can be in person, it could be a Zoom just like this. We really see strong evidence now that individuals who feel isolated or disconnected have a higher risk of memory loss. And there's some studies that suggest it's even at a 50% increased risk. Mental health is important for long-term brain health. We know that as well. But people who go to dinner parties have a lower risk of memory loss. You don't have to go to a dinner party if that's not your thing. But just thinking about being engaged, learning new things. It could be painting, it could be a new sport, it could be meeting a friend for coffee. When you're talking, you're learning. So I always like to think about the things that are fun, that are also good for your brain. And right at the top of the list is just being social in ways that are fun for that individual.
A key pillar of the Center on Longevity's beliefs is the importance of social engagement.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mental well-being, physical well-being.
Yeah.
So that's an opening to me ask about the study that you cited in your book, which has to be my favorite study, which is called the Nun Study.
Yeah.
I would love it if you would take a moment and describe that study and what it meant and how it relates to cognitive engagement and brain health.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple things that come from these studies on nuns, and a big takeaway is that in the past we always thought that if you took a brain scan and you looked and you saw evidence of what we call these plaques or these tangles, which are the hallmarks of Alzheimer's, they're a form of the trash that we were talking about earlier. So there's many different types of trash that form in the brain. One subtype is these plaques and the tangles. And what they found is that there were some of these nuns in the study that if you took a picture of their brain, if you took a brain scan and you showed it to a neurologist, they would say, oh, this person definitely has significant memory loss. There's an amount of waste or trash in the brain that it would be parallel with what we would see symptom-wise of the memory loss. But in these nun studies, they found nuns that were in their 80s and 90s that were crossword puzzle wizards. They were highly engaged. Their memory was sharp. And what it showed us, these studies, is that it brings this idea that it's not one thing that relates to memory loss. It's not just the waste or the trash in the brain. It's not the plaques and the tangles. It's a piece of it. It's a part of it in some cases, and it's complex. But the idea is that it gives us insight into the fact that it's not only what's happening necessarily in the brain directly. It's our heart health, it's our gut health, it's our metabolism. And we believe that there's these other factors that can help lessen the incidence or the impact of some of this waste in the brain. So it's not clear, it's not a clear-cut assessment that these plaques and these tangles always lead to memory loss. They can in some cases, but we believe that we can leverage the fact that there's other aspects of our health that we can optimize to improve our brain health too. So it actually provides an avenue of hope.
So there's still a lot of interest in the sleep, the point of view around sleep. There are a couple of questions from our audience that I want to sort of throw out there.
Yeah.
One question is, how early should we be age-proofing our brain? If I was a bad sleeper for 25 years and I'm 50 now, is there hope for me? And a couple of questions about the impact of sleep aids if we never get more than 6 hours of sleep.
Yes, yeah, great questions. So when it comes to the brain, as we, in general, wants to heal. And it really is always looking for ways to optimize itself. So, we can't make a specific statement that in every case, if somebody does these things, that we're going to see reversal of damage. But I can tell you specifics in terms of studies that you can take people who have sleep apnea, which is highly damaging to the brain. Sleep apnea, individuals who have untreated sleep apnea on average lose their memory about 10 years before the general population. If the sleep apnea is treated, that risk goes down significantly. Studies came out last year that found that the damage done to the brain from sleep apnea is reversible when it's treated. So that's a specific case of a specific disorder. But what it highlights is that we believe that, in general, the brain wants to heal. And if we can put it in an environment where we're optimizing these things that we're talking about, sleep, socialization, exercise, diet, all the things, the underlying conditions, that there's this benefit. Now, we can't be specific for each individual. There's always caveats in specific situations, but we do see the evidence that there's a healing process to the brain. When it comes to the second question about the sleeping aids, there's 3 categories of sleeping aids. And none of them are recommended as a first line of defense for sleep. We've learned so much about how sleep works that we want to really turn to those things first. So we talked about the morning light. We talked about the dark bedroom, making your room a little bit dark. We can talk about some other things too, absolutely. But since we've learned so much in the last couple of years about how our brain works and they're effective, these tips, we want to turn to those first. Sleeping aids, I'll break it down into 3 categories. The over-the-counter sleeping aids, the ones that you can pick them up in a pharmacy or buy them online, or the side effects to the medications that are like certain allergy pills. People use them as drowsy inducing. There's evidence that these medications used long-term and used consistently increase the risk of memory loss. And what we're concerned is that they're anti-choline. Choline is important for memory. They're anti-cholinergic medications. And also these medications we believe might disrupt that washing process we talked about. So those are we're concerned about. The second type is, the melatonin supplements. There's some controversy there, but melatonin is not regulated by the FDA. It can interfere with other medications someone is taking, and it might interfere with the brain's ability to make its own melatonin long term. So it can be used under the care of a physician, but we really want to say, let's try the things that are safe, effective, and based upon lifestyle habits first. If those things don't work, then these things can be used, but under the care of a physician. And same for the prescription, just not the first line of defense. They can be used. Some people need them in some cases. These medications can be very helpful, but they're just being used differently than a few years ago, where they're being used much more readily. Want to use them much more responsibly. Talk about if there's any side effects, and try to get natural sleep first, and try to think about how we can not use them long-term or lowering the dose.
So let me steer the question, and we're still getting questions about sleep, but I'm going to steer the conversation away. At least I'm going to try to. You talked about sort of earlier. You made reference to the connection between your heart and your brain, and your gut and your brain. It's not intuitively obvious to me why those are interconnected systems. Can we start off by sort of taking why, if you're thinking about brain health, should you start with, the lower parts of your body?
Yeah, absolutely. So things that are happening from the neck down are impacting the brain. And it's good. It's good because we have really good treatments for these parts of our health, these aspects of our health. So for example, I always love a fun fact. If you could take your vessels and veins and lay them end to end, just yours, they would go around the earth more than twice. It's staggering, but we need to keep those vessels and veins functioning because even little dips in oxygen or blood to the brain can have impacts on memory that day and down the road. So we now know that blood pressure, heart rate, all these things, heart health in general, impact our brain health. And we can just think of it like the heart is like the engine that sends the fuel to the brain. And so we see that individuals with dementia in studies on average have higher incidence of heart issues. And we see that if we can take care of the heart, we can lower the risk of memory loss. So heart health right at the top of the list. When it comes to the gut, this is one of the most fascinating, strange and interesting aspects of our health. But what's happening down in our gut does impact what's happening in our brain. There's definitely some marketing jumping ahead of the science here, but we do see in terms of mood, aspects of cravings, some fun things we could talk about, just general health, things that are happening in our gut impact our brain. And just in a nutshell, inflammation is a big culprit for aging. And that's when the immune system, essentially, instead of protecting us, makes a mistake and starts attacking our own body. And this can happen in the gut, the joints, but a lot of the inflammation can actually spread from the gut to the brain, or factors can be sent to the brain, these inflammatory signals that cause the immune system to attack the brain. And as you can imagine, if the brain is being attacked, that can raise the risk of memory loss, depression. And so although it might not seem connected, we just want to keep the gut healthy so that we're not sending these inflammatory signals through the bloodstream up to the brain, impacting our brain health.
Can an individual figure out where they are in terms of brain health?
Yeah.
Can you take a test?
Yeah, so there's some things that we can just do some self-assessments. I mean, we're not at the point now where the recommendation is not that everybody needs to run and get a brain scan. That's not necessary. In some cases, people have family history, they have certain symptoms, they have certain conditions, then it's definitely warranted. But just a step before that is just to ask some questions. And what I've done is I've taken the word brain and made a mnemonic because it's easy to remember. I don't know if I'd remember it without the mnemonic. So if you take the word brain and the letter B is for balance. And it's another question that might not seem connected, but just say, how's my balance? Your brain is controlling your balance. As we get older, it's a use it or lose it skill. And it's something that can be a warning sign. Also, if we lose our balance, it raises the risk of falls where we can actually injure and have a head injury. So thinking about how's my balance and do I need to do some things that can improve it? Maybe I need to do some yoga or Pilates or dance or, to do something that we might lose sight of that's important. R is for recall, another use it or lose it skill. And especially in these times where everything we need to know is on our phone, it can be hard to remember things. So just saying, maybe I need to go to trivia night. Maybe I need to trying to remember some information, testing myself, because that is another skill that's use it or lose it, and just giving a self-assessment of how is that going, or because we want to catch things early. Anything that is changing significantly, we want to be on top of. Let's see, A is for just an assessment of how are you getting through your day. And it's okay to forget to pay a bill, here or there. It's okay to forget an appointment. These types of memory little issues, they're normal. Where did I put my keys? Where did I park my car? But if they're happening all the time, again, we want to be on top of things early. We don't want to say that any increased frequency of we're noticing changes in our memory. We don't want to say that that's just a normal part of aging. We want to say, let's look into it. Let's see what we can do. Is there an underlying cause? Is there an underlying condition? Is there something we can do to slow this down or get to the root of it? I stands for intensity of walking. And so all these interesting studies have shown that not only how important walking is for your health, just simply walking, but walking with a little pace to it has been shown to improve memory, intensity of walking. A study came out a few weeks ago, about a month ago, that just like 6 to 10 minutes a day of a little bit of intensity to a walk can be helpful in memory. So just taking that assessment. And then N stands for your number, and that is, how do you feel? How old do you feel? What's your number? Like, how do you feel if you didn't know your age, what would you say it was? And it might seem bizarre, but studies have actually found that people who say they feel younger than their actual age, when you scan their brain looks more youthful. It looks younger. And we believe that there's a mental aspect to this. There's a mind connection in terms of just feeling like, probably we're doing activities that are really good for our brain. We're socializing. We're doing really important things for our brain health. So really just taking that assessment of wanting to feel engaged and wanting to feel, there's nothing wrong with aging. We just want to do the things that that can make our brain work for as long as possible, as best as possible, and just be aware that these are little things that we can do day to day. So I don't know if that was way too much information, but those are some of those questions we can ask ourselves.
So I know it worked for me there. I think of myself as very mature, so I put my age as around 14. So I think that's working for me now.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this question from the audience. And I do want to come back to gut health and dietary health in a bit, but this question came in that, are there benefits of continuing learning in terms of offsetting the cognitive ills of aging? What I'm referring to is substantial new learning a new foreign language, learning to play a musical instrument, or picking up a skill such as golf.
Yeah, absolutely. Right at the top of the list is one of the best things we can do. There's all these interesting studies with super agers. These are people in their 70s, 80s, 90s, up to 100. They have the memory of somebody like decades younger. And some of them have the memory of someone 25 years old. And what's their secret? Well, they do the things we've been talking about. And one of the things that is right at the top of the list is they really prioritize learning new things. And the science behind it is that you have about 80 billion brain cells. And every time you learn something new, you make a new connection. And as we age, we can lose some connections. It's just part of the aging process. So we just want to make new connections. And then the way that we make new connections is by learning new things. And so new is what's important. There's nothing wrong with, reviewing past information that can make a memory stronger, but challenging the brain to reach out and make those new connections, whether it be the things you mentioned are really great. Foreign language, musical instrument, new sport, painting. Just think of something outside of your field of expertise, something you're not highly trained in. Think about doing it a couple times a week. And that's causing the brain to make these new connections. I like to say cross-train your brain. And what I mean by that is that think about things that are just like information-based. So if it's a new course or a book or a foreign language, that's one thing to think about that's really important for learning new things. The second thing is movement, like some learning of, as I mentioned, dance or yoga or a sport, like that's learning too, and that's really good. So a couple times a week doing that too. And then the third is social learning. So, meet a friend for coffee, go for a walk with a friend. When we're with people, we're learning from them. We're listening, we're hearing, we're having an exchange of ideas. So think about in your week having that cross training. Like you wouldn't go to the gym and just do your biceps all the time. You want to do work out different parts of the brain. Same thing with engagement. Those three things are nice things to think about.
So there's a question from the audience, actually sort of near and dear to my heart, given what I do here at the center. But is there any study on the negative impact of retirement as an accelerator to an aging brain?
Yeah, what we see is that it really depends. It depends upon if the person is staying engaged is what's important. So if you're retiring and you are volunteering, mentoring, taking classes, really engaged, that's great. If you're retiring and it kind of turns to television or, not much engagement, that's where we're concerned. And that can happen, and so being aware that this is a time and a chapter of life to really be engaged, to really reach out and do these important things for the brain. Staying working can be good, but if you hate your work and you're staying working, that's not good either. So it's really not about retiring or not retiring. It's about if you love your work and you're enjoying it and you're getting fulfillment and purpose from it, that's great. If you're not, we want to be prioritizing finding it in retirement. And also there's semi-retirement, which is a combination of both. But really the key thing is just having that assessment at any age of, am I finding purpose? Am I finding fulfillment? Am I finding engagement? And that can be through work, that can be through volunteering, it can be through many, many things, but just making sure it's there.
Yep.
So Marc, if we could return back to sort of diet and the connection between What are your recommendations on what people are supposed to do in terms of thinking about nutrition and brain health?
Yeah, this is a big one because we're just seeing so much evidence that what we're eating impacts our brain, not only down the road, but there's these studies that show that like what you eat can impact your brain function like an hour later. And it's not that surprising, when I'm sure we feel this, we eat certain things, we feel more energized, more focused, but the long-term impact is critical too. And so we have these studies, these things called the Mind Diet. These studies, a lot of them come from several universities throughout the country, but the idea is that people who sort of follow like a Mind Diet, think Mediterranean-like diet, they lower their risk of Alzheimer's by about 35%. People who strictly follow these diets, they lower their risk by about 53%. And diet is individualized, diet is complex, but there's some really basic tenets to the diets that are brain healthy. They're good for your heart, they're good for your gut, and those two systems are so important for brain health. So a really good place to just start is just think about, okay, most of the time, and the studies are suggesting like about 80% of the time, looking at your plate and seeing colorful fruits and vegetables. That feeds the gut, feeds the good bacteria that helps lessen inflammation, helps the heart. Fish, fatty fish, a couple times a week those are those omega-3s that are really important for brain health. Nuts are really good for brain health. Really whole natural foods just most of the time. And what we want to avoid or minimize, I would say, is just the ultra processed foods. And next time you're eating something and you look at the package and you're like, this looks like a chemistry experiment gone wrong. This looks like, I can't even pronounce this stuff. What is this? Those are the things we want to minimize, because what's happening is those additives and those preservatives, they get down into the gut, and they can cause inflammation. They can cause bad bacteria to feed off of them, release inflammatory factors that can then spread to the brain. And so it's just about, we can go much deeper into diet, but a really good place to start where we get a lot, I would say, bang for your buck is just whole natural foods most of the time, and minimizing the processed foods. But, right at the top of the list, of course, the berries, the fruits, the vegetables, the nuts, and the lean meats, things like that. And fiber. Fiber is really good too for the brain.
And what about the role of supplements that are becoming much more widely discussed?
Yeah, so supplements are tricky because there's not a lot of evidence. The problem with supplements is that they're either studies that are done by the companies that are selling them, or that it's hard to get quality studies where we have enough people and people, we're really testing these things, because the supplements aren't regulated by the FDA. So knowing what you're getting is a challenge. The other concern is that, there's a lot of marketing in this field. And when there's marketing, there can be pushing things that, that can be good. For example, an example of that is vitamin D. Vitamin D, if someone needs it, is very important. Same with B12. All these things are important if you need them. But if you don't need them, they can actually interfere with cognitive function. If somebody has too much of it, the levels are too high. So really the recommendation is, once or twice a year, just get a physical, get the blood test, see if there's anything that's deficient. And if there's any deficiencies there, we see that the best evidence is with food. The absorption needs to be better, but some people can eat foods high in certain nutrients and still be deficient. And then supplements can be used, but we just want to tailor them to the person for the need, and not just say everybody should be taking, this supplement of the flavor of the week or the flavor of the month, because we just don't have the evidence for that. And we just want to focus on food first. If someone needs it based on their specific needs, then they can deal with it with their personal physician, but then come back and check it, because we don't want to be, the levels get too high and having some negative impacts there as well.
So let me ask you this, Mark. I'm always curious about books that sort of summarize the latest science, recognizing that, you've talked about studies that have been coming out almost sounds like hourly, right? So the science is changing. Where does that leave you? Have any skepticism about some of the current state of the art? Where should we be convinced that this is right and will be true when you write this, the second edition of this in 3 years? And where should we have some natural skepticism towards the state of the art?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the things that are in the book, I try to be very clear about the things that we have a lot of evidence or emerging evidence. And the things that we have a lot of evidence for, we have a lot of evidence. Things have just been piling up that these certain factors like what we're eating, sleep, stress management, heart health, these things are just tenets of good health. And we know that these things are helpful. Where things are more murky are the supplements, things like that. And we want to be skeptical, or things that we're just hearing, especially with social media now, there's a lot of misinformation out there that goes viral that's telling people to do certain things, that are wellness trends. So we want to be sure that things are just because they're published doesn't mean that it's strong evidence. We want to see things that are, in meta-analyses. We want to see that there's multiple studies pointing us in this direction, that we're seeing it over and over again in repeated experiments and published studies that are peer-reviewed, that are double-blind, placebo-controlled. And then we want to keep our eyes on things that are emerging, things that we believe are things we want to keep our sights on. We want to be open to things, but we also, in science, we want to be highly skeptical too. So it's important to strike that balance and be aware that we don't want to just, believe the latest headline, but be open to testing it to determine if it's something that is worthwhile.
So there was a question that was put in the chat earlier that a couple of people would like to have answered, and it's back on the kind of social engagement piece.
Yeah.
So does it matter if an individual is self-motivated to have a social interaction versus someone engages with another? So does the person who initiates the engagement get greater benefit than the person on the other end?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know if there's been a study that has looked at that, is whether or not the person who is reaching out to somebody. I mean, I know that there's something called, there's some evidence that we would call random acts of kindness is helpful for brain health. And the idea of reaching out to people, calling people, texting them to see how they're doing, that has benefit under the category of what we call random acts of kindness, there's these studies at MIT that show that that's benefit for your brain health. But I don't know if anyone has quantitated or qualitated how much different that is versus, and how challenging that would be to do. But let's just put it this way.
And I guess
these things are good. These things are good. It's good to reach out.
Well, I guess it would also depend.
Yeah.
It would also depend if the person who was being reached out to was welcoming the interaction.
Right. That's true. That's very true. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's the other big take home message is that, sometimes people say, but I'm happy, I don't need to have 20 people around me. I'm happy with just, my dog. Well, that's great. We just want to make sure it's not about the number of people that you're around. It's just the quality of those interactions and that you're getting fulfillment from them. And some people that's more people, some people that's less people. And that's up to the person to determine, where they find that comfort.
There have been some, let me just pick up on that. I mean, I believe there are studies, and either of you can correct me if I'm wrong, that the sort of social circles tend to constrict. I see Martha nodding, so I feel like I can forward with the question. Constrict as we age.
Yeah.
We know fewer people. I assume some of that is self-limiting, some of that is by nature of our activities. Is that a danger to our brain health? Should people want to increase their social circles, find new relationships, sort of swim against the tide? Is that a smart brain strategy as we grow older? Yeah,
Martha, do you want to comment, or you want me to go first, or what? It's up to you.
Well, I will just say, Ken, people's social networks do contract, and it's generally because they want to have more meaningful engagements. But I never thought about it as if you sort of go outside of yourself, you benefit from trying to expand your social circle. So I'll let you answer that, Mark.
So let me just add to that, because it's Mark, and then put to you. It was interesting. So we Mark and audience, we hold an annual conference called the Century Summit, and it was last in December. It will be next in November, as a heads up to everyone. And one thing that stuck with me is some sort of older fellow stood up and in sort of a formal question, talked about how he was trying to intentionally, now that some of his network had disappeared in different fashions, he was intentionally trying to go out and find new friends, often younger friends. And that was like an intensive action that he and his wife were trying to take. And I thought that was very interesting and somewhat laudable, but so it sort of stuck with me as whether that's a strategy we should all be trying.
Yeah, there's some interesting research at the MIT Age Lab that looks into this idea of the shrinking of social networks. Because if you think about it, there's understandably, maybe you had children and that their friends or their parents of their friends, that is
Yeah.
not happening anymore, or certain things through work or certain things have just changed, understandably. And so what they've seen in their studies, which is interesting, is that it's exactly what you mentioned, Ken, is that one of the solutions or the remedies that they propose is reaching out to younger people. They tell this story about a woman that they were studying, and she joined a theater group for like community college theater group, and how it really built up her social network and her group, because all of a sudden she was tapping into this group, and it doesn't have to be theater, but that it's something to consider, that it's okay that to be aware that that social networks can shrink as we get older, and if that's a concern for the individual, which it can be, to think about reaching out of their comfort zone and finding some ways to increase their social groups.
Interesting.
Interesting question just popped up. I'm always concerned about the chicken or the egg question. Someone with increasing memory loss may avoid social interactions, so it appears that less social interaction leads to greater memory loss.
Yeah.
When the reverse may be true. Are there studies? Can studies be designed to avoid this conundrum?
Yeah, I mean, we have this in multiple aspects of brain health. We can think about this in terms of even with sleep, or with the brain is such a key part of controlling so many aspects. So people say, do sleep problems come before memory issues or brain issues, or is the brain having issues that's causing the body or the brain to have difficulty sleeping? And we see the same thing with social engagement, stress coming internally or externally. So it's a challenge, and I think from what we see, it's very likely it's both ways, that in some cases one is happening as a precursor, and in other cases the other one is happening, and it really boils down to this awareness and warning signs and things that are changing, and taking some self-assessments and taking some time to say, wait a second, how am I feeling? In a world where we have so much distraction and we have so many things pulling us at every direction, that just taking a moment and saying, how am I mentally, physically, how are my cognitive functions, how am I feeling? And taking those assessments can be really important so that we can, get ahead of these issues.
So there was a question earlier on, which is, I think, interesting individually, but also socially. The question of the effects of toxins, the effect of the environment on brain health.
Yeah.
And recognizing that toxins in the environment aren't spread equally among the population. Probably, I think we all know that poor and underrepresented communities are more exposed to environmental degradation. Is there a link? And does it fall unequally on the population in your observation?
So this is really our next emerging area of where we see an impact on mental health, long-term brain health, is the environment. And we're realizing that the health of our planet is impacting the health of our brain. A big one to talk about is pollution, what we're breathing. So, right at the top of our nose, our brain is right there. And these things that we breathe in, these pollutants can get into our brain cells, can interfere with the brain cells' ability to function. And so we just want to be prioritizing clean air. We want to be prioritizing our environment, the health of our planet. There was a study done in Vancouver that I talk about in the book, where people who lived on a very busy street and there was certain toxins that were emitted had a greater risk of memory loss. Now, they mitigated that by spending some time in a park nearby that had cleaner air, or getting some fresh air. I'm not, we're not saying that's the only solution, but what we want to be aware of is that these toxins play a role. They're not the only thing. Everything is the accumulation of these factors. We want to do everything we can to mitigate these factors in any way we can. And by taking some steps like, I'm going to go to a park, I'm going to get some fresh air, I'm going to get some green time. These things are important, and they can easily, they can seem silly, but they're impactful, and they can help negate some of the negative aspects of the things that we're concerned about.
How, you say the brain wants to heal, but how important are creating early habits in long-term brain health? What should we be having our kids do?
Yeah, that's a really important point. So the brain undergoes a lot of dynamic changes in the first 20 years of life. And these are times where you could think about it, the brain is remodeling itself. And these are important times for being aware of the impact of our lifestyle and our environment on our brain health. It's like if you're building something under favorable conditions, it's more likely to turn out. It's more likely to work better. It doesn't mean that we can't spend and prioritize later in life, optimizing our brain health. And if there's trauma, these other aspects, they can be there's all this, we understand there's things that can be done. But in the first 20 years of life, optimizing sleep is important, especially early on. I mean, we and I think we see this with now being aware of school start times and being aware that we want to make sure kids are getting enough sleep. There's a concern with all the screen time and how that's impacting brain health. Screens can be good, there's good to them, but they can keep us from getting outside. They can impact sleep. They can impact social interaction face to face. Again, they can be used for good, but just being understanding of that balance. And then one other piece of this puzzle is, we talk about, use of certain drugs that can impact, it's a whole other conversation, but the use of things like marijuana in the first early stages of life, teenage years, there's a conversation that, these things are safe and they're natural, but we are concerned about how they can impact brain health years down the road. And it's something that we just want to be aware of, that we want to prioritize and treat the brain throughout our life as a precious thing, but it's very precious in the early years as well.
There's an interesting question that came in about the impact of hearing loss on dementia.
Yeah.
Is there an impact, and if so, how can it be remediated?
Yeah, that's an important point. So we're seeing all of our senses play a role in memory function. Hearing loss is the one we know actually quite a bit about. So even if hearing loss is mild, it raises the risk of memory loss. And if the hearing loss is moderate, severe, the risk just goes up based upon how the level of hearing loss. Now, if the hearing loss is something that is treated with something like a hearing aid, then those risks go pretty much all the way back down again. And what we believe is happening is that if we're struggling with hearing, we're not learning as much. We're not as engaged. We might not be as social. We might feel more isolated. And this is just another example of something that seems disconnected, but is really connected. And it's just another example of something we want to prioritize. We want to be aware that we want to get our hearing checked. We want to make sure that we're treating it, because if we can treat it, we can protect the brain. Similar study with cataracts. People who get cataract surgery, if they need it, they have better memory 10 years later because they're improving their senses. And we just want to be doing everything we can to optimizing taking in information and making sure it's getting to our brain, because that's how we keep it engaged.
There's a question, you mentioned drugs and other substances, but what impact does alcohol consumption have on brain health?
Yeah, so alcohol is controversial. It's controversial when it comes to brain health. So when we talk about the MIND diet, the Mediterranean-like diet that has been shown to be something can lower risk of dementia, one glass of wine a day is included in that diet. And I always like to say the only time I ever got a standing ovation was when I mentioned that in a talk. But it's controversial because the studies are conflicting when it comes to alcohol. And we want to break it down like this. First of all, anything past moderate alcohol intake we're concerned about when it comes to brain health. Moderate alcohol, there's some evidence it might be beneficial. It might have some anti-inflammatory impacts. There's these polyphenols in things like wine that might be beneficial. But we want to be really careful to say that this is something that is, really beneficial for brain health, because there's conflicting studies. And when we see studies that are so conflicting, we believe that there's some individualized aspects here. So some people have genetics or underlying conditions where alcohol is not beneficial to them, and that might be driving issues with their brain. And so when it comes to alcohol, we want to go one step further and encourage people to once or twice a year have that conversation with their personal doctor and say, based on everything you know about me, is there any reason why I shouldn't be having moderate alcohol intake if I want to have it, based on my family history, anything about my genes, my underlying conditions? Because people deserve, when it comes to these things where we see conflicting data, and I think that's something you brought up earlier, Ken, is where we want to have that line of, okay, we still are going back and forth on what the answer is here, and alcohol falls under that category, that we want to get individualized guidance on those types of questions.
So let's do a couple more questions. And then we have, and I want to thank everyone in the audience for sort of an extraordinary, both a quality and quantity of questions. We're not getting to all of them. There are many more good questions and answers in Marc's book, and I recommend it highly to everyone. But Marc, let me ask you this. This is more of a personal question. So I'm 59. Everyone I know within a decade of my age on both sides are say fairly frequently, my memory is just not what it used to be. Yeah. And I say that too, even though my memory was never that great. I'm not sure it's any worse now than it was before. Is there any way we can have a real sort of evaluation of our own memories, whether they are really declining, or is it likely that it's happening, or is this more sort of a social sentiment we use to excuse ourselves when we have the natural forgetfulness that humans have?
That's a great question. So a couple of things to think about are that we live in an environment where it can make it difficult to remember things because we're inundated with a lot of distractions, a lot of multitasking. And as we get older, it can be more challenging to remember things when we are being distracted and we're multitasking. So just a really simple tip is that if you want to remember something, just think about focusing on that and nothing else for about 10 seconds. It sounds ridiculous, but there's a part of the brain called the hippocampus, and it's the filter. And we think we want to, you think your brain wants to remember, but it really wants to forget. It doesn't want to fill up with useless information. So there's all these filter steps. And as we get older, it can be harder to get past the filters to make the information stick. And so the book is filled with these things, but one thing is just really, if you focus on information for about 10 seconds, your brain goes, oh, this is important, and it passes that threshold and it's transferred to longer term memory as opposed to just being sort of thrown away. And the idea is that we often don't spend 2 seconds remembering where we parked our car, put our keys. We're often on to the next, or multitasking. On the other hand, we don't want to ignore any worsening signs, anything that's increased frequency. Because really a big message is that early detection, it could be many things that we have good treatments for, that we want to determine what's the root cause of this memory issue. So the encouragement is, if someone's noticing changes, to seek out the help of their personal physician and work with a neurologist and see, is this just day-to-day, sort of memory issues that are normal, or is this something that has reached the point where we want to figure out what's going on? And there are assessments and tests that can be taken absolutely to determine that. And being encouraging not to be afraid of those tests. They can be very helpful, and determining what line we are at, because there's something called mild cognitive impairment, which over the age of 65, the rates are increasing, and it can raise the risk of significant memory loss. But we have evidence that if we can catch these things early, we determine the root cause, there can be some slowing down of this process, and in some cases reversing it.
So can we look out 20 years from now and think about what might be the biggest breakthrough, but also what, in hindsight, would we likely get wrong?
That's a really good question. So I think that we're starting to see in the last year some medications that are not perfect when it comes to treating Alzheimer's. They're not perfect, but they're a step in the direction. And I think that's very hopeful. Determining, of course, they're sort of under emergency authorization right now. But the idea is that we're starting to see some forward motion there after 20 years of not much. These lifestyle factors and understanding how important they are, and I think more are going to be discovered too as we move forward, and which is going to be important as well. I think that waiting for a magic pill, though, is something that thinking there is a magic pill is also something that is a concern, because these things are so complicated, and so that they're so multifactorial, and they're not just based on one thing. When we're talking about memory loss or dementia or even Alzheimer's, we believe that these things come from multiple different sources, and it's kind of like a glass, where the glass, it fills with water and then it overflows. So on one hand, the positive side to this is it's not just one thing. And we think of it like a straw that breaks the camel's back. We just want to leverage lower risk and take as many straws off the camel's back. But that's good. It's not just one thing, because I wouldn't want anyone to leave this conversation thinking, oh no, I'm having trouble sleeping, or I have this one issue. I'm definitely going to develop memory loss. It's usually the accumulation of these multiple factors, and we just want to do the things we can control to leverage and put things on our side as much as we can. But I think that, waiting for a magic pill, although I hope that happens someday, I think it's unlikely, especially because there are these multiple factors. It's not just one thing. We go back to the Nun study. The treatments will get better. Early detection will get better. And the sooner we can catch things, the sooner that we can get on top of things, the sooner things we can, start using some medications that are in the pipeline, along with these lifestyle factors. There's a lot of hope that we can protect our brain long-term, in significant ways.
All right. Well, thank you, Mark, for getting the Longevity Book Club off to a great start. Really appreciate it. This is a great conversation. I want to thank everyone for so many great questions. For the audience, you can find out more about Mark on his website, drmarcmilstein.com. I'm going to spell that drmarcmilstein.com. And his book is The Age-Proof Brain. Where you can find it, Mark, where is the best place to buy it?
It's in Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I think it's everywhere. Local bookstore.
Everywhere you get your books.
Yeah. So
right.
Great questions. Thank you so much for the great questions.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
That's great.
I do want to let everyone know our next book club event is on April 12th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, noon Pacific Time, with Abby Davison and Myra Strober on their new book, Money and Love, an Intelligent Roadmap for Life's Biggest Decisions. Producer Kate has put the registration link in the chat, so you can register right now. And thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Martha.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
Bye,
All right.
everybody.
Bye-bye.